Good evening. This week, of course, we are in the 9 days now, and as the Navi Zechariah said, Yehovchu Yomim Elu L'Moadim U'L'Simcha, and this Friday is the yahrzeit of the Arizal. Now, we know that the Arizal lived in Egypt, and Eliyahu Navi came to him and told him that the whole reason that he was born was to have Reb Chaim Vital as a Talmud. So he should move to Eretz Yisrael, and he did. And Reb Chaim Vital, who lived in Damascus with his father, Reb Yosef, and Mekubalim of that generation, we're talking 450 years ago, said on Reb Yosef that he would be able to free from a negative claim for Averos half of the world. In other words, his chosim were big enough and strong enough to diminish and delete and leave out completely to forgive through his tefillah half of the world's averos. That was the father of Reb Chaim Vital. So the Arizal moved to Tzfas, and for the last 2.25 years of his life lived there. And of course, Reb Chaim Vital was his star Talmud, and as we know, he took him into the boat in Tveria once and told him to take a drink of water, and that was Be'er Shel Miriam. So in Inyonei Kabbalah, Reb Chaim Vital never had a hard time understanding Inyonei Kabbalah after that drink, because that drink was right over the Be'er Shel Miriam, the Mayonos HaChochma were there. Now, the Arizal said that he should be buried on the mountain where he is buried, and when he pointed to his Talmidim to the mountain, he said that there's Kiflayim Kiyotzim Mitzrayim buried there. That means 1,200,000 Yidden over the years, in the last 2,000 years, that over 1,200,000 were buried there. Now, if we go to that mountain, as we have gone many times, you'd see 6,000, 7,000, maybe 8,000 graves that are there. And he said that his mountain where he's to be buried will be the first place of Tchias HaMesim. So they asked him, but Rebbe, the Gemara says it's Har HaZeisim is the first place. So he answered and said, for the world, the first place is Har HaZeisim. But for Eretz Yisrael, the first spot of Tchias HaMesim will be on my mountain. The Arizal, some held he lived only 33 years, some said 36, and some said 38. But everyone agreed that he did not reach 40. And he is buried, he was the Rebbe in his shtibel in Tzfas, and the Bais Yosef was the Mechaber, was the Rov. He was the Rav who paskin the Shailas, and you had the Al-Shech HaKadosh there, and you had Reb Shlomo Alkabitz, who was the Mechaber of L'chododi. They davened all together, these tremendous tzaddikim, Balei Ruach HaKodesh, and tremendous effect for the community as they lived there. Now, we know that The Arizal used to quote pretty often the Zohar that says, the Lamed, the Shasah, the 365 losas, says the things that we're not allowed to do this, we're not allowed to wear shatnez, we're not allowed, all those things are, each one is keneged a different day of the calendar year. So says the Zohar HaKadosh. And the Arizal used to quote that very often, because if he saw someone who did an Aveira that day, he would tell him which day it corresponded to in the calendar year, and on that day he had to do tshuva anyway, but to be mahader in the tshuva for that day, because it was affecting negatively that day of the year, the Aveira that he did. Anyway, his yortzeit is Hey of, and he said about the mikveh that he was toivel in every day, that he promised, he said it is a lashon of havtocha, that anyone who dipped into that mikveh, his mikveh in Tzvas, not, it's maybe 300 feet away from where he's buried, that they will not die without tshuva. That was a promise, a havtocha from the Arizal, but you have to know that it is freezing. The water is ice cold. But I've been into that mikveh maybe 3 or 4 times, and knowing that the Arizal promised if you're toivel in his mikveh, that you won't die without tshuva, so that is a tremendous thing and a powerful motivation to go into that mikveh. And anytime I've been there, there have been at least 20, 30, 40 people waiting to go, and you can only go in one at a time. And Zechuso Yogen Aleinu, he opened up the eyes from the time of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived 1,500 years before him, vistas and panoramas of Kabbalah that nobody in between ever was megala so much. In other words, Reb Shimon broke the ice and revealed, he wrote the Zohar, and it's all the secrets and things of it. And the Arizal picked up from where Reb Shimon Bar Yochai left off and continued to be Megala and to answer questions of Kabbalah that were never revealed before he lived. Zechuso Yogein Aleinu. Now this week's Parsha is Parshas Devarim in Sefer Devarim, a brand new Sefer this week. And coming into the Sefer, we begin with the very first Parsha of Devarim. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu said the entire Sefer in 36 days. The 37th day he was nifter on Zion Odor. But the pasuk says, "Vayehi ba'arboim shana ba'ashtei asar chodesh be'echad lachodesh diber Moshe el kol Yisrael." So when did that come out? The 11th month, which the pasuk says means it was Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So on Rosh Chodesh Shvat he began. He went for 30 days in Shvat, and then 6 days into Adar. And on Adar, Zion Adar, he was nifter after saying it. Now, the word Eila, Meforshim ask, or Chaim HaKadosh talks about it, and others, why was the word Eila the very first word of this written? It could have just said Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe El Kol Yisrael, And that's it. Why did he have to put in, why was it said the word Eila? So the Svarim and the Kli Yakar talks about it, that Eila is Begematria 36. And Moshe Rabbeinu knew that there was going to be trouble by Klal Yisrael, chiefly that they were over the 36 chiyuvei koros. That means excision has 36 separate averas, that if someone does it, that they are chayav, they're obligated with excision, which in the Gemara in Yavamas, there is a debate between Rashi and Tosfos. What is the punishment for excision? So one holds that he doesn't live longer than 60. The other one holds that he dies, that his children in his lifetime, he lives to see them die. It's a very lo aleinu, lo aleichem, it's a very negative thing, but these are the main averas that Mekubalim and Tzaddikim said why Klal Yisrael is punished. And that is the reason why Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha, and he started with the word Eicha, because it's Begematria 36. Because he saw that the Churban, which was coming, that it was really these 36 Averas that the Yidden were doing. The first Bais Hamikdash, there was a Churban because of Avodah Zarah, and there was Gilui Aroyos, and there was Shvichas Damim. So it was very clear, the Gemara says why they were bound to lose the Bais Hamikdash. They were doing these three terrible Averas. But the second Bais Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. And they had to introspect. In other words, the Sinas Chinam, also the Averas of the people brought them down a level. And that's why the three Haftorahs of the 3 weeks, because what is Sinas Chinam? Largely the Mefarshim say, when a person is jealous of another Yid, he wants to hear bad about that Yid, he wants to speak badly about the other Yid, and he wants to see the person doing something wrong, which makes him happy. That means, why should he be happy at another Yid doing Averis, talking Lashon Hara, or seeing, looking at bad things, or saying bad things about this other person? Why should that make him happy? But that was the Sinas Chinam. It was for nothing. And that's why the first 3 Haftorahs of these 3 weeks, last week Parshas Pinchas, we began with Divrei Yirmiyahu. Daled, Divrei is the speech, the mouth, the talking against another Yid. This past week, Matos Maseh was Shimu Devar Hashem. Shimu is listening with the ears. And next week, this coming Shabbos, is Chazon, seeing. That's the speaking, the hearing, and the seeing that Yidden had one Yid to another was the Sinas Chinam that brought about the Churban. Now, Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha, and Yehoiakim, who was the king, heard that he was writing something. He knew Yirmiyahu was a Navi, a prophet. He was writing something about, because of the Averis of the Yidden, they're going to lose the Bais Hamikdash, and the king is going to lose his power. So he summoned him to his palace, and he said, I heard you just wrote a new composition. And Yirmiyahu said, yes, it's about the future destruction of the temple, the Bais Hamikdash. and he asked him to read what he wrote. And when he said that the king will lose the kingdom, Yehoiakim grabbed it from his hand and threw it into the fire. So the Sefer Eicha that we have today was afterwards, Yirmiyahu went home and rewrote Eicha. Now we say Eicha, it's one of the Chomesh Megillos. There are many shuls that read it only from a cloth, that means parchment, just like we read Megillas Esther, and just like we read Koheles or Shir Hashirim. Many Hasidic shtibel do not read from a cloth, from parchment. They just read it from a Chumash, Shir Hashirim, and Koheles, and Eicha. But everyone reads Megillas Esther from parchment because we're making brachas on it. And according to the Gra, he made brachas on Shir Hashirim and Koheles also, not just Megillas Esther, because it's part of the Chof Daled Kisvei Kodesh, the Chomesh Megillos, the 5, and Eicha is one of them. So he rewrote Eicha, and that's what we have today, that we are able to experience from the words of Yirmiyahu. And the Yidden, they beat him up, Yirmiyahu, and they threw him into a ditch. I mean, he had a tough life with the Jews, and he was just predicting and warning them what they had to do and what was going to be. Now, we know that the Parsha begins, and the first 3 Parshas of Sefer Devarim is a rebuke. It's an admonition from Moshe Rabbeinu to Klal Yisrael. And he reminisced and went back. Do you remember in the Midbar, in these 40 years, that when we, in this place, you did this and this? And then he said, do you remember in this place what you did and what the consequence was? So Rashi points out right away in the beginning that he doesn't mention any of the Averos. He doesn't mention the Meraglim, he doesn't mention the meat, the slov, any of the Averos. He only talks about the cities. Because Rashi says, and it's the Medrash also, that he didn't want to humiliate Klal Yisrael. That he was very cautious in rebuking them and all the admonition, but only mentioning the places because he did not want to have to humiliate and embarrass them. What do we take out from this Chazal? That when we have to deal with our children or our students or anything that we have to deal with in life, our spouses, our neighbors, a Rav with his community, we have to season the rebuke and the criticism very cautiously. We see that Moshe Rabbeinu did not say one of the Averos, which they all paid a terrible price. For the Meraglim, they would have been, without the story of the Meraglim, 11 days from Egypt into Eretz Yisrael. And they had to spend 40 years crisscrossing the Midbar, up and down and back and forth, and for an 11-day journey, they had to remain in the Midbar, in the desert, for 40 years. But when he spoke of the Meraglim, he didn't mention it. He only mentioned the place where it took place. And that was the hint, and they understood what he was referring to. So when we have a legitimate criticism, or we have a legitimate item on agenda that we could, the person did something wrong, they should be told, but the format of how we criticize and how we make a statement to somebody else who has tripped in his lifetime, we have to season it with dignity, respect, that the person should walk away with the actual fruit of the criticism and not bearing bad feeling and going home hurt, insulted, offended. And that's what the practical application of what Rashi is telling us is when we deal with other people. We have to stop for a moment before we express ourselves. Many people, the biggest problem they have is that they don't think for a minute before they start to talk. They just respond, and then comes the rationalization. Oh, well, he did this, he did that. You don't think that he deserved to have it over the head? And the answer is no, we don't think that. We think that you have to exercise discretion and dignity for the other person when you rightfully point something out to him, but the how and the when and the where and the tone of voice is the entire issue. Now, it says that Be'ever hayarden be'eretz moyav hoyel Moshe ba'er es haTorah hazos. And what Moshe Rabbeinu was referring to was that when he came down from the mountain after the Torah was given to him, he gave it over in 70 languages. So the Chidushei Arim asks, what did he have to go into an entire 70 languages? Most people in every generation, they know 2 languages, they know 3. Some are more into language, so they know 7, they know 8. No one knows 70 languages. So what was the purpose for him to say everything in the 70 languages? Because the most effective tool in dealing with people is the way we speak to them. Not the books that we produce and we give to them, which could be wonderful. I mean, people are uplifted and encouraged and inspired and enrich their Yiddishkeit by many Sfarim that we have. You know, when I was growing up, they had talks and tales that Lubavitch put out, were stories for children that came out every week about Shabbos, about that in English. And Rav Mendelovich asked Rosenzweig, the Gevir who gave money to Reb Aaron Kotler to open his yeshiva and to Ner Yisrael, and he asked him to print and have produced for Klal Yisrael the blue chumashim that we have with Rashi on the bottom in English. Because people who wanted to learn, they didn't speak any Lashon Kodesh or they didn't understand it, how were they supposed to learn a pasuk? So that he took somebody who knew the pshat of every pasuk very well, and he took an excellent writer, and Rosenzweig put out, I mean, this was like 1946 or 47, and it cost him like $200,000, this project. Now, $200,000 in 1947 was probably more than the value of $1 million today. And he produced it. But you had only 4 or 5 items that were in English. Today you go into a bookstore, to Eichler or to wherever else, and there almost isn't a thing that's not in English. They translated everything. That Shas, and Art Scroll did a magnificent job, and Torah Anytime is doing a magnificent job in reaching the whole world with the vehicle of technology and what they make available to the world. So there's no excuse for someone really not to learn. But Moshe Rabbeinu did it then because what he did was Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labonim, and he etched it into the essence of Klal Yisrael, that wherever in the world a Yid was going to live, whether it was Brazil, or it was in Taiwan, or it was in France, or in America, that it should have its blueprint in the essence of their very being. Now, it could be the person did not know the language, but the seed was planted by Moshe Rabbeinu that when he tries to learn the language, he'll learn it, and he can then use it as a vehicle to help people grow in their Yiddishkeit and to flourish in their efforts of tshuva. And that's why he did it in 70 languages. Because if he had not done it, then when a person wanted to make Balei Tshuva or to teach a class, and he couldn't learn, the obstacle of learning French would have been 10 times harder. So that's why the Pasuk says that he taught everything to Klal Yisrael in 70 languages. And even though they didn't understand the languages, but it instilled the power to soar heavenward with that language when they needed to use it. Now, Rashi says a very important fundamental thought. And that is that when he's talking about the Meraglim and other things that they did, he says that had they not done this and that, then when they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael, they would have not have needed any weaponry. That means we know that when they came into Eretz Yisrael, they had to wage war 7 years to have victory and conquer, and then they needed 7 years to divide up all of the Shvatim into the land. But when they had to wage war, they had to go with Klei Zion, Rashi says, with weaponry, with swords, with whatever the weapons in those days were, and that's how they were able to be victorious. But without the Klei Zion, they would not have been. And the Sfarim say, because a person who is 100% Erlich and 100% Mekayim, the Torah, with all of its trimmings, he is in the sea of above nature, above Teva. And that's why you find Tzadikim Gemurim, that the Gemara says, if even HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed something, they could wipe it off the map. That means if someone was supposed to die and they didn't want him to die, they could have just given a bang on the table and said, this is what I would like to see, and that's what would have happened, which is unbelievable. So the point is, and we have in our generation, we had tzaddikim that, the Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, when it came to Simchas Torah, when he walked during the week, and I remember seeing it, he had to have 2 people on each side of him help him walk because his feet or his legs were like logs. They were so swollen and they were so weak that he barely couldn't take a step. Now, when it came Simchas Torah, and the Oilam used to sing a niggin, but it was only the Rebbe who danced. And how did he dance? Not in a little circle. He went around the walls of the Beis HaMedrash. And they once calculated the footage of how much he danced while everyone was singing, and it was 13 miles. Simchas Torah at night and 13 miles Simchas Torah by day. So they once asked Dr. Burston, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he was a medical doctor a block away from Satmar, and an Erlich Yid who never missed a minyan or learning Gemara every day of his life. He was a medical doctor, but so Erlich and so a Tzadik Gomer. So they asked him, the Rebbe is so weak on his feet, he can barely walk the 2 blocks to get from his house to the shul to daven, and he needs 4 people almost carrying him. How on Simchas Torah do you explain that he's running 13 miles at night and 13 miles in the morning without anyone holding him or anything? So Dr. Burton said he's l'mala min hateva. He's above nature. On a regular weekday, nature fits in. And that's how he's able to do what he does during the week by the laws of nature. But when it comes to Simchas Torah, he is completely above nature, the Simcha of Simchas Torah. And by the way, the Koshnetzer Maggid used to say that the 9 days of now, when we're not eating meat and we're not drinking wine, those 9 days correspond to the 9 days of Sukkot. And that Tisha B'Av is Simchas Torah. Because Simchas Torah, we know that that is the holiest of holy. We are immersed in the mikveh, the water, the sea, the lake, the ocean of Simcha. And that's why there's no Gashmias. We have no mitzvah. We don't take a lulav and esrog on Simchas Torah. On all the other Yomim Tovim, you need a shofar. On Rosh Hashanah, if you don't sound the shofar, you never gain all of the effectiveness of sounding the shofar. And you can't accomplish anything, or you could, but only up to a certain level. The main grenade to knock out all the mekatrigim is the Tekiyah shofar. But when it comes to Simchas Torah, we have no special mitzvah. The mitzvah is Simcha. And that propels us into everything. And on Tisha B'Av, which we're going to talk about in just another minute, it has in it the power of total Simcha also, even though we don't practice that at this moment. But we're going to discuss how it's linked to Simcha. So said the Koshnetzer Maggid. So that's how the Satmar Rebbe Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levracha was noyeg with all of his hanhogas for the mitzvahs that he did. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it says that you're not supposed to sleep out of a sukkah. Now the Tzemach Tzedek said that you're not supposed to sleep in a sukkah. Because if a person goes to sleep and has a defiled dream, something not of Kedusha, it's mevaza the shechina of the schach, that he's lying there on a bed and he's dreaming about terrible things, and he's metama, and he is metama the koyach of the schach there, so it's better not to take a chance and don't sleep in the sukkah. So Chabad does not sleep in the sukkah. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe was sat in his sukkah, and he always had, while he was in the sukkah, 2 bochum, teenage bochum, standing outside, and they took shifts. Every 2 or 3 hours they would change bochum because they were standing there listening to the Rebbe if he would call them or if he needed them, and then to guard him. You know, it was Crown Heights, and he was in the sukkah outside on the grass in front of his shul, so anyone could have just come over to the sukkah and done whatever they wanted. So they had shmira. All of the bachrim who were there testified that they were outside, And the Rebbe used to learn the whole time. And he would sing a niggin. They heard the niggin the whole night, which means he didn't sleep a day because he didn't want to sleep out of the sukkah, because the Shulchan Aruch says to sleep in the, and his great-grandfather said not to sleep in the, so he never went to sleep. Now, humanly, how could someone stay awake for 7 days? Impossible. Impossible. But these are things that tzaddikim gemurim could control and be able to be above. Like, you look at the Amshon of a Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael. This past Yom Kippur, and it was all over the newspapers there, he fasted 72 hours. Now, if a regular person wanted to have Tosfos Yom Tiv, an extra hour, an extra 2 hours, but nobody, B'derech HaTeva, could go for the 72 hours. And he made Havdalah at the end of 72 hours, which was almost Erev Sukkot. Made Havdalah and then walked over to Shul and had a tish, a Hasidic tish, for the next 3 hours. After fasting for 72 hours and drinking the wine from Havdalah and then taking a tea. And that's all that he ate. And he sat there singing and speaking after 72 hours of fasting. Explain that to me, B'derech HaTeva. But he's Kula Ruchni. And you see it in 20 different ways. I'm not going to take the time now. And even Tisha B'Av, he fasts 50 hours. Because it says in Shulchan Aruch that we begin with the beginning of the Peronius, the difficulties of Tisha B'Av. They began to burn the Beis HaMikdash. But both of them, the main burning was on the 10th day. But even it was the main burning, but it's when it began. So we fast on the 9th day, not the 10th day. But he fasts 50 hours, both days. So we see that the power of Lamala Min HaTeva is available, is there by tzaddikim. And people could rise to that level. But it's a big task, and it means not eating potato chips and French fries every day of the afternoon and the evening. You have to turn yourself into holiness, and I'm not suggesting anyone do it, because it's a big task to achieve, but I'm just saying there were Yechidim, there are Yechidim in every door that has that ability to rise so high. Now, I'm going to speak for the next few minutes about Tisha B'Av. And we know that when Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos, there's a Mishnah that talks about it. We know that the only 2 days on the calendar that we would fast, Erev Shabbos or Shabbos, is Yom Kippur. That means when Yom Kippur falls out, Yom Kippur cannot fall out on Friday. But when it comes out many years, like this coming year, no, I'm sorry. No, this year, yes. Yom Kippur will be Shabbos. We fast. And that's because of Shabbos Shabboson. Like I've said to you, that the Shloah HaKadosh asked his Hasidim, his Talmidim, which is bigger, Shabbos or Yom Kippur? And they all answered Shabbos, because the punishment for Shabbos, someone who's Machal Shabbos, is a death penalty. But if someone's Machal Yom Kippur, it's chorus, it's not worse, it's not a death penalty. So he answered them and said that no, Yom Kippur is bigger, and the reason that the punishment is a notch down from that of the punishment of Shabbos is because that Yom Kippur is a day of Rachamim and is a day of Chesed, that the whole Klal Yisrael comes out cleansed and clean from Aveira, and that's a kindness, that's an act of mercy. of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because does every Yid deserve that? But it's like walking through a shower, whether you want to be cleansed or not. If the shower's coming out with soap and water, you're going to be cleansed, clean. So, and on Asara B'Teves, if it came out Friday or Shabbos, now it cannot come out Shabbos, but it comes out many years on Friday. And we fast because on Yom Kippur and Asara B'Teves it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, that word Be'etzem, but it doesn't say it by Tisha B'Av. So if Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos, if Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos, we don't fast, we don't have Tisha B'Av. We push it off. It's called a nidche, it's pushed off till Motzoi, Shabbos, and Sunday. But we find in the Mishnah that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he held differently. He held that if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, kivin de idche. Once Shabbos is over, the 9th day, the Tisha B'Av of Av, is finished. And there's no reason to begin from the beginning with Eicha and fasting and everything like that. Why did Rabbeinu, we don't paskin like Rabbeinu HaKadosh in that Mishnah. We paskin like the Chachamim, that if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, we have to Motzoi Shabbos, start fasting and keep the whole day. It's a nidcha, which means it has certain leniencies because it's a nidcha. But so if a Rav has to paskin for someone, if they say they can't fast, they're allowed to paskin with certain leniencies because it's a nidcha. But this year it's not a nidcha. It starts Monday night and it goes for all day Tuesday. And we know that you're not allowed to do anything until after Chatzos the next day. And for meat and wine, most hold that until night. In other words, you cannot have a fleishika suda on Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's after Chatzos. And you could take haircuts and you could wash your clothes and everything. There's a big difference of opinion about showers in the 9th day. Now, in many places, especially Hasidish and and Litvish, they don't take showers. They sponge bath themselves a little here, a little there. In our yeshiva, we did take showers because the baths were tainig. That means when they used to cook up water for 3 hours and then Erev Shabbos take a hot bath, it was pleasure. It was L'Koved Shabbos, but it was a Machaya. And that was the only time during the week that they bathed. But we today do not bathe for tainig. We do it for cleanliness. The average person, the average normal person, will take a shower every single day of the year. So there are many areas that do not abstain from showers during the 9 days. Some do it with colder water, so there should be a difference. Some do it that they don't use the strong regular shampoo. They'll just use a touch of soap or something. But there is a debate, but there's no debate that you shouldn't be doing washing clothes, laundry, taking a haircut. That even though in the 3 weeks you're allowed to take a haircut if someone is a sandik or a moyel or the father of the baby, but in the actual 9 days there's a debate if you're allowed to take a haircut if you're a sandik. Some hold no. It only applies to the first 13 days of the 3 weeks, but the severity of 9 days, you should refrain from a haircut, even if you're the sandik. Others hold if it's not the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. For instance, this whole week now, beginning with Sunday night, Rosh Chodesh Av, until Shabbos, is not the week of Shavua Shachal Bo Tisha B'Av. It's not that week. Because Tisha B'Av was not in this week. But Sunday, Monday, and then Monday night, Tuesday is Tisha B'Av. So Sunday and Monday, they would hold, those who hold that if you're a Sandik, you could this week take a haircut. Even though there are others who say no, because it's 9 days. If you're a Sandik or a Moil or the father of the baby. But they most agree that the week that Tisha B'Av is, you should not take you can go to the mikveh, and you could put on Shabbos clothes because you should wear Shabbos dicker clothes. You're a Bal Simcha, a person who is a Sandik has the power of giving brachas. You find in many shuls that when they hear there's a bris, people come to the shul who don't even know the Bal Simcha. But they come to ask the Sandik for a bracha, for children, for parnasa, for shidduchim, for whatever it is. I was once in a shul, and it was a Sephardi shul, Sephardi, where the Sephardim are, and there must have been 200 people who lined up to get from the Sandik a special bracha. So there is such an idea of what it is. Now, why in the world would the Koznitzer Maggid have said that Tisha B'Av corresponds to Simchas Torah? And the reason is, as the Bnei Yissaschar and the Arizal talks a lot about, the first 4,000 years before Mashiach, where we're living in, we had a Chorban Beis HaMikdash. The Yidden were doing Averis, and we are lamenting and crying about it to this day. And Tisha B'Av is, we're Avelim. Just like if someone, lo aleinu, lo aleichem, lost their father or lost their mother, they have to sit Shiva, they have to keep their shoes off, because we know that the floor is din. And walking without shoes on, it says in Kabbalah Svarim, you attach yourself to din, to gevura, to the severity of din. And since you're under judgment when you're sitting Shiva, something terrible happened to you, we take off our shoes and we attach our feet to the ground. That's cursed. Arura ho Adama. And Yom Kippur, we take off our shoes, nothing to do with Avelis. Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv. We take off our shoes, as I've said to you 10 different times, that the Shvatim sold their brother and bought shoes, so we have to have a kapara on those shoes. So for the last 4,000 years, since they sold their brother, Yosef, we take off our shoes Yom Kippur as a kapara for that, and that's why it was instituted to the Chamisha Inuyim, that we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't put on cologne or perfume, we don't put oil or cream on our face, and we take off our shoes. So what I want to say to you is that Tisha B'Av is the only day on our calendar that there's a difference between hours of the day. What do I mean? When we start Tisha B'Av, we are not allowed to sit on a chair. We're not supposed to smoke. We're not supposed to put on in the morning chakras our talis or tefillin. Comes chatzos, we put on the talis and tefillin. A person who wants to smoke, he's supposed to do it. Many still hold bitzina, but whatever it is. But he could, if he does it publicly, you can't criticize him really. And we could sit on chairs. Why the sudden change of the day? And the answer said by the Bnei Yissaschar from the Arizal and the other Mekubalim, because that's the time Leidas Mashiach. See, Mashiach is born into every generation, and he's dying to reveal himself and fulfill his purpose. But he can only do it when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, go, now is the time. But that Ratzon, the will to reveal himself, is heightened on Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. It becomes like a different day. We still can't eat. We can't put on shoes. We can't drink. But much of the halachos of the day change with the learning and with what we could or can't. All Tilim, all of these things suddenly change. So the point being that in its essence, it has the power to reveal Mashiach. And that's the simcha of Simchas Torah. And that's why the Kuznetz Maggid says that it corresponds the 2 days one to another. Because in essence, it's the happiest thing. If tomorrow Mashiach came, we'd be dancing in the streets. And we would end up shortly, all Kanfei Nisharim, on the wings of eagles, brought to Eretz Yisrael. And we would be standing at the Bais HaMikdash by the Koisel HaMaravi, and we would be davening mincha together. So isn't that something to be dancing and laughing and happy about? That's simcha. That's a simcha of Simchas Torah. And that's why we have that on Tisha B'Av, the change of the hours and the hanhaga of what we do and don't do, differentiating to the other hours of Tisha B'Av. It becomes a new mitzias. And it says that Mashiach, who no one knows who it is begging in Ruchnias for Shamayim to allow him to reveal himself. And that's why there's a minig, the Shulchan Aruch says, that people should go to a cemetery to visit Kvarim on Tisha B'Av. Now, why should someone go to Kvarim? And it says also that if you go to Kvarim, you have in your hand you have a bunch of garlic in the hands, and when you walk into the cemetery, you throw in all the directions the garlic. It's mavriach. It chases away the chitzonim and the bad guys, the shadim. And then after throwing the garlic, you should walk over to the graves that you want to go to. Because since it is a day that Mashiach is begging to reveal himself, it's the beginning of the process of Tchias HaMesim. So we go to the Mesim, to the Niftarim, and we ask them to do like Yirmiyahu went al Kivrei, he went over to the Kvarim and begged them to help him to avoid the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So we have to make the effort on Tisha B'Av. The halach is, it's a sad day, it's a day of mourning. If Mashiach suddenly reveals himself, goodbye Tisha B'Av. But right now, it's still before the Hiskalus of the Geula Shlema. So we have to act accordingly on Tisha B'Av. And I want to tell you that the last Haftorah of the 3 weeks, this coming Shabbos, is called Shabbos Chazon, because the Haftorah begins Chazon Yeshayahu. Now Yeshaya was one of the biggest Nevi'im. We know that in the times of the prophets, there was a second person, and he was called a Choiza. And he could also see future and see things that they gave him to see from heaven. But what he said over what he saw, it didn't have to happen. But if someone as a Navi said over the Nevuah, the prophecy that he saw, it had to happen. So Yeshaya said Nevuah his whole time. Everything you have in the Sefer of Yeshayahu, everything is under the umbrella of Nevuah. But there's one exception, and that's the Perek of Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos that we read as a Haftorah this week. Because even though Yeshaya only said Nevuah, prophecy, but when it came to predicting and saying what's going to happen with the Churban, he didn't want it to have to happen. And if he would have said it Betur Nevuah, then it would have had to happen. So he said, look, I was told from Shemayim to say it, but I'm not saying it over as a Navi. I'm saying it over as if I was a choize. So it never has to happen. I hope it'll seep into the ears and to the hearts and to the minds of Klal Yisrael, and they'll do tshuva. And they'll stop doing what they're doing that's bringing about the Churban. So he said it under the umbrella of Choize Chazon Yeshayahu. We hope that before Tisha B'Av, there's still 3, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days till Tisha B'Av. Anything could happen. There could be Mashiach coming down the street in 10 minutes from now. And let's hope it happens. The Klal Yisrael has suffered enough with family tzaras, with difficulty, with government tzaras, with all sorts of things that they've lived with for 4,000 years. Well, the Churban was just 2,000 years ago, the second, and the other one was 490 years before that. So it was like 2,500 years. But we've been suffering since the time of Avram Avinu, and we hope that we will be surprised with the Geula Shlema. But if we have to fast on Tisha B'Av and he's not here before that, everyone should have an easy fast, and you should be able to pull through without having to ask a shaila about chas v'sholom eating, even though Tisha B'Av is a d'Rabbanan, but it is the most strict of the d'Rabbanans. The other fast days are not equal par with Tisha B'Av, and that we should be able to usher in the days after Tisha B'Av, which we're going to talk about next week, Be'ezras Hashem, which will be the beginning of the beautiful days, beginning with Chamisha Asar B'Av, which are days of Chesed and Rachamim.